with the issue on the reading assessment. Is there any further public testimony on that issue? Seeing none, I guess.
On reading assessment?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have the, I wrote a note back here. You're gonna have to let me find it. I don't really. I just need to have Shelley Hamill send that data from the cabinet meeting when you guys get that put together to us and to LSO so that we can work on that bill draft that Chairman Scott had talked about. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, is that a directive from the committee? You want a bill draft to incorporate those recommendations from their literacy cabinet?
From the literacy cabinet.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Hamill spoke to the committee regarding the literacy cabinet that was formed underneath the superintendent of public instruction. They had recommendations to the committee. I think what Chairman Northrup's requesting is a bill draft based upon your direction earlier to review it in the November meeting that incorporates those recommendations, which we have not seen, only heard.
Those are with regard to the section 401 in the statute.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what we're after. So we have something formal in front of us and then we can dispose of it one way or the other.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman?
Okay, any objection?
I don't really have a problem with us because I did talk to Ms. Hamill. I am part of the cabinet as well, and I did miss the meeting unfortunately, but one of my concerns is that I would ask that if we're going to draft this legislation, to work directly with them and to make sure that what we're doing is, I guess the biggest thing to me is to make sure that we're not making any substantive changes to this. I think that after talking with Ms. Hamill, a lot of this is cleanup and maybe some cleaning up of some language that they don't quite understand. But I would say stay away from the recommendations of an exemption. I have some serious concerns with that. And so that was one of the discussions and one of the recommendations from that group. And personally, I'm not in favor of that. So I guess I would ask, with the directive from the chairman and the motion for a bill, something concrete, what exactly are we asking for?
We're asking to have their recommendations put in, and then that gives us something we can amend up and down one way or the other.
In the next meeting.
So, and some people will agree on them, some won't, and we'll debate it, deal with it. Okay, so that's the request. Okay, no objection. We'll deal with that. The next item on the agenda is the school finance recalibration. My understanding of the schedule on that is that it's scheduled to be done during the 2025 interim between the budget session and the next general session. Is that right? Or I'm confused on the exact dates of the schedule there. Matt, can you fill us in?
Mr. Chairman, the most recent recalibration occurred in the 2020 interim. The 2020 interim.
Uh-huh.
The law requires a recalibration at least every 5 years. So the next scheduled or required recalibration is no later than the 2025 interim, which those recommendations would be debated or forwarded to the 2026 budget session.
Okay. The question I have is, there going to need to be any action at the end of calendar year 2024, which action would need to be authorized in the coming budget session. If there isn't, we're fine. If there is something we need to get started on so that we can function in that 2025 interim, we need to legislate on it this time?
Mr. Chairman, generally, the legislature has established a select committee to address the recalibration effort through the legislative process. And they've done that multiple ways. They've done it through the budget bill. They've done it through the LSO feed bill or the legislative appropriations bill. They've done it through a separate piece of legislation. That's a policy call for the legislature to make. Nothing has to be adopted in this next session, the 2024 budget session. If the legislature wants to acquire consultants prior to the 2025 session, that may be an appropriate budget item for this session. So if you want to do an RFP process or an RFI process, it may be primed to establish money within the legislative appropriation bill to and require LSO to go seek consultants or experts to perform that work prior to the 2025 session, which was done in the 2005 recalibration. So it's a policy call for the legislature on how quickly they want to proceed.
Okay, but it is probable that we will want to hire the consultants in late 2024, so we're ready to go in 2025. Is that a correct understanding?
Mr. Chairman, I think that is probably a preferable option. So you have adequate time to educate either your current consultants that you have in our contract or any potential new consultants to provide them the opportunity to learn about Wyoming's school finance system.
Is the existing statutory language adequate so that we can do that in the probably the feed bill, the legislative budget bill, or do we need to have further authorizing legislation in place before we do that? That's the real question we're trying to get at, because that's what would require us. If we have to have further legislation, we ought to write a bill. If we don't, we can just rely on the budget footnote or a line item in the legislative budget, then we're fine. You don't need to do anything.
Mr. Chairman, you don't need additional legislation. Again, as I said, that's a policy call for this body to make, but the way it's been done in previous iterations, there's been 3 different vehicles, but you can certainly use your legislative appropriation bill to do that or another piece of legislation. And as I indicated, the budget bill, the general operation government bill has been a vehicle, or a separate piece of legislation has also been a vehicle. But there is no obstacle that I foresee that you have to have a separate piece of legislation.
Committee, it seems to me that we can not have a bill draft and can just proceed. I'm going to suggest that Chairman Northrup consult the Speaker, and I'll try to consult the President of the Senate and make sure that that's what they want. So that if they want something different, we can draft a bill and bring it to this committee. But if the leadership wants to proceed just based on a budget footnote, that's fine. We just need to make sure that things happen so that we aren't delayed a year because we didn't start quick enough.
Mr. Chairman, you can certainly send a letter to Management Council advising of your recommendation that may inform not just the presiding officers, but the rest of the Management Council who actually sponsors the legislative appropriation bill.
I don't think we need to be that formal, but I do think that we ought to consult our respective leadership.
Mr. Chairman,
And
I was just going to say, I mean, the previous 2 recalibrations that I've been a part of, they were done almost ad hoc the session before, and we were able to pull it together extremely quickly. So I think definitely having leadership involved is a great idea, but I don't know that we need to have any draft legislation up and running
And I think you're probably right, but I think we need to consult with our leadership and make them start thinking and be prepared if they do want something.
Yeah.
And they may. Senator Ruffus, you're in the Management Council.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think one of the things that probably could be contemplated, although not something we have to decide today, is whether we want a full recalibration with a complete RFP and going outside for different approaches to recalibration, or whether we want a smaller scale audit style recalibration, which is similar to what we've done in different years, because it definitely takes a different amount of time for the process. When Picus and Auden, who we've used for a number of the recalibrations, can come in and quickly be up to speed. And so it's going to be fine almost on any calendar timeline if they're the ones that are doing it. But we definitely experienced when we had a different consultant come in 2 recalibrations ago, I don't think they had enough time. I really don't. And so we didn't begin the process early enough to get them hired early enough to have them have truly enough time to get the report in a state where I think we would have benefited entirely from it.
That's why I've been pushing, because I don't want us to get caught on a time scale there.
But I guess, Mr. Chairman, my suggestion would be we should decide what we want that to look like, and then suggest to Leadership Management Council, whoever we want to, either that we want a big one, and therefore we want it on such and such a timeline, and we want to make sure, either way, the budget will be there. I'm not worried about the budget as much as I'm worried about the rollout of when the RFP goes out, which is much more important than having the budget there. The budget's going to be just fine. That doesn't have to be decided today, but I think that's an important thing for this committee to perhaps discuss and give some thought to what we want.
What do you see the pros and cons are? Let's get our thinking started.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, we've done the same approach for most of the recalibrations. And honestly, what we could do next time is just have an overview of the last few recalibrations of the different approaches that are available. We did a hybrid PJP, and what was the other aspect of that that we did a couple of years ago with Augenblick? It was an alternative to it, where we went out to the communities and we asked for costs, and then we did the cost-based analysis that Picus and Auden has done, each of the other 3 recalibrations. You get similar results. So with Augenblick, we actually had perhaps some different ideas brought to the table, but they didn't have enough time to finalize those, which was the concern. With Picus and Auden, I can tell you what they're going to come back and say already, right? Because I've read it 3 times. It'll show up again, and
I will say to the newer members of the committee that the report that Picus and Co did last time, the recalibration report, if you don't have it already, get your hands on the first, 30 pages, 40 pages of the report before they get into the weeds, and read that. It is a very enlightening summary, and I strongly recommend it to any member of the committee that hasn't read it. Matt, you could get them copies of that if need be, could you not?
Mr. Chairman, it's on our website.
Yeah.
Under the school finance. If you go to the finance, a link down to the school finance hyperlink, and then the reports tab underneath the K-12 studies selection, you can find all of the school finance studies that have been completed. And the most recent at the top is the 2020 recalibration report.
I really recommend that to any committee member that has not read it. That particularly the first 20 pages and the tables that go with that are very valuable.
And Mr. Chairman, reading the Augenblick one from 2017 also, because again, now you have two different consultant groups that are bringing two different approaches. There's a lot of 95% similarity probably between conclusions that you would draw, but it is those are the two that would be worth reading. And then the prior Picus and Odden ones are very similar to what you saw in 2020.
Mr. Chairman, I guess to Senator Rothfuss's point, my only thought on this is this committee would be making maybe a recommendation, but management council is ultimately going to be the one that develops the RFP and puts the RFP out for us. This committee certainly has its prerogative as the education committee, but at the end of the day, what's going to go out for consideration for an RFP and selecting a vendor in any way, shape, or form, I guess what it would be is whether or not this committee, I guess the only thing I can see in this way is whether or not we as a committee feel that there should be a different approach than what's been done by the previous two, and whether or not we want the RFP to look differently, right? Because other than that, it's really just hiring the vendor to come back out and give us updated figures to what's already been accomplished.
Well, and let me just throw out my personal opinion here. I think we need, in the recalibration, we need to bring, so the total funding is up to a point that makes sense, given the degree of inflation we've had in the society and given how that applies to education. And it's probably more sophisticated than just looking at the CPI and escalating, because we're much more labor intensive, less intensive on the capital side, and on some of the things like utilities and whatnot. They're less important, and the salaries are kind of overwhelming. So we need to have that. And the other thing, I want something we don't need to rely on the consultants. There ought to be a built-in sunset date, because we've had too many examples where we've had a standoff between the House and the Senate and we don't get anything done. And the way you solve that is put a sunset date in that drives it, so that the legislature has to pass something. And that forces a legislature to come to a compromise, or it faces a special session. And we've had cases where we just couldn't get to a compromise. And that's, I think, been harmful all around. And that's just putting a sunset date in the recalibration bill and passing it, so that the next one has to come to a compromise, is a remedy for that.
Mr. Chairman, one thing I'll note, though, is that we really haven't adopted any of the recalibrations since I've been on recalibration committees. So I've been on 3 of them, and recommendations come through. And again, with Picus and Odden, you've got the cost-based model where they make recommendations based on what has changed on the cost basis of education, based on the shifts that you're talking about, where we don't have as many librarians now, for example, and we have computer folks as a good example. We know that throughout the state, many schools have school resource officers. Those are not reflected in the model. Things along those lines, counselors, a lot has changed. The purpose of the recalibration is that aspect of it, to determine a cost basis for education based on how education is being delivered at this point in time, and that's what the courts asked for. All we've done in the past is effectively read that, recognize that to achieve it would typically cost $50-ish million of additional appropriation, and then since it was more money, honestly, the legislature has just said, all right, well, we'll just stay where we're at right now, and we're comfortable with it. So the concern there, to your point, is we've never actually adopted the legislation in the past. So I don't know how confident I would be that this time would be unique, where we would take their recommendation, put it into a bill, and then actually pass that bill. I've never seen that happen.
Well, I think you have a better chance of having it happen this time than we've seen because there has been so much inflation in the society. And the other problem that has been getting it adopted in the past is that certain of the school districts came out better if it wasn't recalibrated. And I think the inflation is enough so that won't be true this time. And I think that means we got a better chance of getting it adopted this time. But we need to get on a system that gives us a regular bill with a forced compromise every time we do it.
Mr. Chairman, I guess the concern there, though, I mean, the ECA, which is mandated on an annual basis, in theory accounts for inflation, and that's where we've taken into consideration the inflation. Last session, obviously, we had a full ECA, so we accounted for inflation. We'll have a recommendation this year. That's where, to a large degree, the inflation is taken care of, although in the year of the recalibration, we don't typically have an ECA because of the anticipation of the new model.
And I think the ECA is limited enough so that we need to do the recalibration and have the hard look. And that's why the statute is set up the way it is right now.
Yeah, I think we need to do it. I guess I'm just concerned that maybe we don't end up with a bill.
Representative Provenza?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think to the point that the notion that we'll pass what is recommended, given inflation, we also have to remember on the House side, we have essentially an entirely new body where we have a large number of people that haven't been serving. This will be their first time. So I think that we don't know what will happen on the House side. So from that perspective, I would keep that into consideration too, is you got to get a bunch of new people up to speed.
That does need to happen. That's a well-taken point. And we need to think about how do we go about getting people up to speed. My thought is that we need to take the time, do it right, get it done, and look at some of the issues that are involved that we've been putting off. And the current system just has not been satisfactory. And I think part of it has been the fact that certain districts benefited from not doing it. I don't think that's going to be true this time. So this is the opportunity to get it right and get a compromise. Now, last time was especially complicated because the feds came in with a big stimulus thing that changed the rules. I think the day the Senate passed its version of the recalibration, or the day before, and that really fouled things up. We won't have that happen again, I don't think.
So with regard to some districts benefiting and some districts not, almost all of that always comes down to the regional cost adjustment calculation and the approach to that. Overall, everyone would always benefit from any of the recommendations because every recommendation that has been the final recommendation has been adding $20, $50, $75 million to the model. So it really did raise the total and tended to raise all boats. But the sticking point on the some benefit, some don't is the regional cost adjustment, which we're still using the, I believe, 2010 version, if I'm not mistaken, which is broken and antiquated and has problems. 2005, is it 2005? Yeah, okay, yeah. A long time ago. Yeah, and the challenge there is that it's now so far out of date, and we have one district that so far outlies the rest of the state that it's easy to come up with a regression model for 47 districts. A regression model for 48 districts turns out to be very, very challenging and fails, which is not uncommon for regression models. So it's a little bit broken. And again, with that discussion, you do typically have significant winners, significant losers. There's never been enough discussion about glide paths or anything like that to allow for a transition. It could be accomplished, but this gets to the point where you need a lot of time for that discussion. And we've typically tried to solve that in, 8 minutes, and nobody could come up with anything, and that would be a compounding problem. So if we do want to finally address the regional cost adjustment, that can be done as part of the recalibration. There are ways that we've talked about doing that that could potentially be constitutionally compliant with the court's requirements that it be based at 1 and then move up from there. All of those types of approaches tend to cost more money. So you have to have at least a one-time circumstance where you're adding more money to the funding model to be able to make that RCA shift, which once again, nobody's ever wanted to do, to fix it in a constitutional way. So it's hard, but it's plausible.
Okay, so committee, I think where we are is we'll talk to the leadership and try to trigger their thinking and ask them, do they want us to do a bill and talk about some of the provisions that we're going to need to put in it. And for instance, we do need, 2005 is extremely out of date. And I think so we need to say we need to fix the regional cost adjustment, and maybe that needs to be a specific line requirement in that statute that we looked at. Okay.
On those lines, if we do have a runway a little bit, one of the challenges for regional cost adjustment is that the Wyoming Cost of Living Index isn't very sensitive to specific school district sizes. It's sensitive to regions of the state. And that's always been a challenge. If you wanted to be able to fix the RCA appropriately, one thing that could be done is to try and get our economic analysis division to start doing a more granular approach to the Wyoming Cost of Living Index, which is it's outside of the education scope, but it starts to solve an education problem. And that's something we've never even looked at tackling before, but it would go a long ways towards creating a system that can solve the RCA concerns and be sensitive enough.
The recalibration committee needs to deal with that this committee in a bill written in November can't do.
Mr. Chairman,
We need to say,
I'd say the opposite. I'd say what happens is the recalibration committee can't deal with that because you literally need a year in advance to implement such a system. So when the recalibration committee comes together, the data doesn't exist, and you'd have to wait at least another year. You'd have to change the policy to create a system that has the granularity that would feed the recalibration committee so that you could have an appropriate RCA. So every time we do it, it can't be done because we didn't plan ahead by a year to get sufficient data. So if we actually want to solve the RCA, honestly, one of the first steps would be talk to the Economic Analysis Division about what it would take for us to get better data right now.
Mr. Chairman?
okay,
I was just going to say, looking at the body language of this committee, that the conversation between you and Senator Rothfuss is, I'm picking up on it. I think Chairman Northrop picks up on it. But the vast majority of this committee is so fresh behind what we're talking about that it's glossing over, right? And that's a symptom of the larger disease that is going to plague the entire legislature. And so I think we have really started just kicking a dead horse, but I do think that it's Senator Rothfuss's last point, in my opinion, is probably where we should be looking. If we are interested in having better data to move forward with, then this committee should look at doing a RCA adjustment with the Economic Analysis Division and look at having them maybe at our next meeting to put something like that forward.
if we bring them in and prepare a draft bill telling them to get that better data, bring them in. One thing bringing a bill like that forward would do would be to start to educate all the rest of the legislature, presuming we can get it introduced. Because that's telling them to do something specific that we'll need. What would the committee think of the strategy of we'll plan that on the next agenda? We'll ask Senator Ruffus to work with the LSO staff to give us a draft of a bill so we have something to work from, and consider amending it and making it a committee bill. We'll consult the leadership. Do they want more than just that item in it?
Matt has a point.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think your economics analysis division is going to be able to, I don't believe your economic analysis division is going to be able to inform you well enough on what data they need. You, as a legislature, have a consultant that's an expert in regional cost adjustments that can advise you on what data is necessary to revise or inform your economic analysis division on what data they need to collect in order to do that. So that's Dr. Lori Taylor, who has ran various models for this legislature. She is more well-equipped to consult this committee and tell you what data she would need, or any other expert in regional cost adjustments for K-12 education would need to be collected prior to running additional analysis.
And that meeting, one way or another, as well as the economic analysis people.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's exactly right. So when Dr. Taylor is doing the calculation, Dr. Taylor always complains about not having sufficient information, which gets to what I'm saying right now. So if we work with Dr. Taylor, try and figure out what we would need, then work with Economic Analysis Division on how they could potentially get that, whether we could further break down. I mean, there are some that make good sense, like having Teton County, for example, be its own island on the cost of living index instead of it having, I think there's 4 counties associated with it. Things like that just make intuitive sense. But at the same time, maybe you can't go county by county on the eastern part of the state. I don't know. But I think that we could improve the divisions, at least from the standpoint of the regional cost adjustments. And I do think that Dr. Taylor has specific information that she's interested in understanding. So we could just look into that. If we need a draft, which I think we might, we could look at having a draft for next time, but we can at least start pursuing that. If the committee is comfortable providing some flexibility on what that draft would be based on recommendations from Dr. Taylor and working with staff, I think that's a reasonable approach.
Chairman Northrup, are you agreeable to that kind of an approach?
Yes, Chairman, I am.
Committee, do we have a consensus? Let's proceed that way. Chris, can you kind of help Matt ramrod that?
Yeah.
Get us something we can work from. Doesn't have to be perfect. You can put your own prejudice in, we can take it out. But
On that, the funny thing is that for as long as I've been in, Albany County has been 1.0 each and every year, almost regardless of which mechanism you use. So my bias is minimal on this one.
okay, well, we'll proceed on that basis. We'll consult our leadership and tell them that's what we're up to, and see if they want anything else in such a bill. But I think that this will get it rolling. This will help us educate everybody else. This will give us a better chance of solving that thing that's prevented us from. Okay?
Mr. Chairman, just a clarification. Is this for the September or the November meeting?
November.
Thank you.
Now, talk to us, Matt, if you need further guidance at the September meeting. We can do that. We've got a half day tied up with the Appropriations Committee. We extended that last time. We could do that again if we had to.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm just thinking, without consulting Dr. Taylor, I'm looking at this would just be essentially a study directive, maybe controlled by LSO or the legislature, working in consultation with the EAD on what data elements that would be required to be collected by that agency or some other agencies across the state that could be accessed to assist in the recalibration, the regional cost adjustment for the upcoming recalibration.
This is to get the data that we're going to need to do it. So that would be something that the idea would be to start immediately after the budget session and give the people doing the data enough time to get it done.
Thanks.
Okay? Representative
So
Burke.
then the meeting on the 27th, we're just one day. We're not, that's not going to be 2 days. We can do that in one.
At this point, I think it's just scheduled to be joint with Appropriations Committee, hearing from these experts.
Okay,
But we, in the past, we extended that meeting as just an Education Committee meeting to deal with some of the other issues. We could do that again if they need further guidance in getting this bill draft ready. But we won't do it unless they need that. Okay? Maybe that we'll proceed that way then.
Question,
Yes, sir.
on my calendar, I have that 27th as a Zoom. Is that correct, or how's this?
Matt,
Yeah,
explain.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Allred, it is a hybrid, what we call a hybrid meeting. So we'll have a physical location in Casper that both members from the Joint Appropriations Committee and Joint Education Committee can attend in person, or you as a legislator can attend via Zoom at a location that you that best suits your needs. So we do that primarily because there's only 14 chairs up in Casper at the half a day. And we do this for efficiency purposes, not only for staff and the committees, but for consultants, that same message is being provided to both committees, and questions are being heard by both committees. And testimony from the public and other agencies is provided in a single opportunity.
On that meeting, we're going to take information that day, but are we going to do any type of motion on the ECA that day, or are we planning on doing that in the November
I
meeting?
think the statutory schedules, we have to do it that day.
We have to make a motion and based on that recommendation?
Yeah,
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, the statutory charge of this committee is to make a recommendation to the Joint Appropriations Committee no later than October 15th. And then the Joint Appropriations Committee will take your recommendation at its October meeting and make its own independent recommendation to the governor and the legislature by November 1st. So the September meeting, this committee will act on its recommendation related to the K-12 education resource block grant models, ECA for the 24-25 school year, and recommend that to the Joint Appropriations Committee.
Mr. Chairman, then my question is, if we're on Zoom and we have to make some votes, can we vote? If we decide to be on Zoom, that's okay. So what if there's 14 chairs, what if 15 of us show up? What is it?
Mr. Chairman, we'll figure out. We have the 2 rooms up in Casper that could potentially be used as necessary seating.
I can't decide.
There's enough room to.
I know I asked you, but what do you want us to do? Do you want us there, or do you want us to, do you care?
for education.
Okay.
I want you to use your judgment, because it's a fair trip. We will have to make that recommendation, so there's some substantive stuff. But what I'm hoping is at least some of the other people will be able to make it in person.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think last time we did it this way, we had the joint meeting, took all of the testimony and presentations, and then we adjourned as that joint meeting, and then we came back in as Education Committee. I assume we'll do that.
That's right.
Are we only scheduling it for a half day, or are we scheduling it for a full day, and the afternoon is going to be? Because I know we'll get public testimony, that could be substantial.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, currently it's right now scheduled as a half a day. Generally, the testimony from your LSO and the Department of Education and your consultant, Dr. Stoddard, takes approximately 2.5 hours. depending on questions. And then the balance is provided for the public testimony portion and the committee's debate and recommendation on the external cost adjustment. If it goes, an hour or two extra, it's not unheard of. And Mr. Chairman, if you recall, last year was unique in that you as a Joint Education Committee had other topics other than the ECA to discuss. And so you had a separate meeting for the Joint Education Committee to discuss other topics.
That's where we are. We'll proceed on that basis. Okay, Community College Commission, we're ready for you.
Mr. Chairman, would it be permissible to have Ms. Erin Taylor join us to help with timing here? So as Ms. Taylor is coming up, I am Sandy Caldwell, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Community College Commission. Thank you for having us today. I do want to recognize that we have, while there's not a large number of people in the audience for us today, we actually have a large group that is online watching right now. I do want to recognize that with us, we have Dr. Brad Tyndall. He is the incoming president of the presidents. So he is the liaison with me to the Executive Council of the Presidents. Also online is Dr. Darren Devine, president of Casper College. Dr. Jeff Hawes, president of Eastern Wyoming College. We have Dr. Joe Schaefer. He's the president of Laramie County Community College. President Lisa Watson from Northwest College. We have Dr. Janelle Oberlander from Gillette Community College District. We have Dr. Walt Tribely from Sheridan College, and we have Dr. Kim Dale from Western Wyoming Community College, as well as many of our commissioners who are online. I want to make sure we let folks introduce themselves, and then we'll get right to it. We did put together a PowerPoint presentation to help us move through the submitted materials and questions that you asked very quickly. So if I can.
Michael Swank, the Chief Financial Officer for the Commission.
Hello, Dr. Ben Moritz, Deputy Director of the Commission.
Hi, good afternoon. Erin Taylor, Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees.
Get started on the presentation.
Absolutely. So let's get rolling on this. We know time is getting short and you want to get through this, so that's what we are going to do. We had several committee requests from you, and we put together a document to go over those materials. I do want to mention that in advance of the follow-up questions that we received, we did submit the enrollment reports to the committee right after the May meeting. So you have that. I am happy to share, as we dig into this data, that the enrollment for the fall semester of the community colleges is looking to be up. We're very pleased with that, between 4% and 5% right now. We'll get a more final number on that, but this is really good news, looking at our community colleges and the community college system as a whole. This particular presentation, we are focused on how many WICHE students come to Wyoming. The enrollment report looks at border states and all other states. You wanted a specific question about our WICHE students that come to our state. You wanted to know how college tuition, because that tuition is under the purview of the commission, is impacted by Hathaway scholarship students, and we have that for you today. You also wanted to know, is that impacting the student enrollment in general? And we wanted to provide that analysis for you based on the yield rates that we see across the state. And Mr. Swank will wow you with our biennial budget request. Different from what you heard from some of the other agencies, we do that in a very transparent process. So we can share with you all of our numbers because that actually had a tentative adoption at our June meeting, and we'll get into that. And then you wanted to know about the mill revenue potential for the service area counties outside of the 8 taxing districts for the colleges. I will mention, we also provided an Attorney General opinion to you on the differential property taxes for counties and college districts if a college district was to expand. We're not going to go into that topic today. There didn't seem to be a follow-up interest in that, and but we certainly can talk about that. But we did provide that information. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Swank, who can talk about the Witchy region and the enrollment related to the Witchy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what we try to do is design this presentation, kind of go through the memo that we provided. So it kind of simply follows that. The first request was to go over the Witchy students that come to the colleges, and we've kind of outlined this in 2 slides. So the first slide is I think it's slide 3, has the geography of what Witchy is, the Western Interstate Compact, I believe, Commission, sorry, for higher education. And it shows the region, but it also, we wanted to clarify that because Nebraska is a neighboring state to Wyoming, they receive the same benefit from the Western Undergraduate Exchange Tuition Program, meaning they will only be charged 150% of resident tuition. So it's kind of Witchy +1 in this particular chart. If you go to the next one, it's an actual head count of non-resident students for, I believe, the last 6 or 7 academic terms. So fall, spring, summer terms that come to the state. The numbers are fairly consistent among all the terms if you go from fall to fall or summer to summer, that sort of thing. But it also shows that the vast majority, close to near 100%, of the non-resident students come from the Witchy region and Nebraska. If you take out Nebraska as a not official Witchy state, but a Western Undergraduate Exchange state, the number drops to about 85 or 87% come from Witchy, but they're all receiving the same benefit. Sorry.
Clear, the Witchy organization is not paying for any of these students. This is just the states they come from.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay.
So sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I wanted to point out as Mr. Swank is going through this to highlight the Witchy students make up the vast majority of the out-of-state students. I still want to highlight that almost 90% of the community college students are Wyoming students. So that still holds. This is looking at those who are not. So it's still hold. We are looking at our enrollment report coming in very soon for our most recent year, and it is consistent data.
Mr. Chairman, if you go to the next slide, this actually segues right into this slide when you talk about resident and non-resident students. So the committee asked for basically 3 different looks at how enrollment is impacted by tuition, the college tuition rate. The first one is we looked at general enrollment, which is resident, non-resident. Has there been any substantial decreases or increases as the commission has increased tuition? The commission is required by statute to establish the tuition rate for all the colleges. It does that, considers that generally annually. It does have a policy that is actually reviewing this year. It's a 5-year policy, and this is the first year since 2018 that they're obligated to, by rule, to revisit that policy. So we hosted a tuition policy retreat in June. It was a half a day, and we took a lot of testimony from colleges, other public stakeholders about where the tuition should go or what type of policy the commission should have in place to consider when they do their review of tuition each year. So since the commission does the actual tuition raises or increases, they're the ones that kind of impact a significant portion of student cost, direct student cost. The other side of this that is not captured in these next few slides are student fees, which are charged by the colleges themselves. There's both required fees and there are also kind of consumable course type fees. None of that is actually under the purview of the commission. Those are exclusively from the college perspective. So if you go further into the slide, this kind of preps the next few. We did a generalized look at enrollment compared to tuition, so it's resident, non-resident. And we did 2 looks, one of for Hathaway, sorry. The Hathaway in terms of the number of high school graduates or the percent of high school graduates that are initiating their Hathaway scholarships at the colleges. And then look at comparing the tuition rate for the colleges to the both semester and annual rate of Hathaway award rate for students. So this next slide, slide 6, is the resident, non-resident review. What we did do is we tried to look at the percentage of resident, non-resident. The absolute numbers fluctuate from year to year, and I think there's a note here that says the actual head count of students can fluctuate. I believe more recently it's a little bit lower, but even at the earlier times of this timeline is in the 25 to 26,000 individual unduplicated students. So we looked at the percentage of resident, non-resident, and as Dr. Caldwell said earlier, that the resident number of students is about 90%. It's just under 90% right now at about 88, 89%. And then the out-of-state or non-resident students, which are the vast majority, WICHE students, are at about 10 or 11%. When we go to the next slide for Hathaway, the first thing we wanted to show you is how the tuition rate compares to the Hathaway award levels. There are currently 4 Hathaway award levels. There's the honors, performance, opportunity, and provisional opportunity. So the latter 2, provisional opportunity and opportunity, are set at the same level, but the performance and the honors are at different levels above that. What we show here is that the commission has raised tuition from $79 per credit hour to $105 per credit hour during this time frame, academic years 2014 through 2022. We also show, in terms of comparative analysis, we looked at on the colleges operate kind of on a assumption that students will be able to graduate after 4 semesters, so roughly 15 credit hours per term. So that is what we made our analysis on, was 15 credit hours per term or 30 credit hours per academic year. If you look at the area that is shaded on the right here, you'll see that the honors scholarship level for Hathaway at 1680 currently, that would equal roughly 93.75% of the college tuition level for that student that takes 15 credit hours. And then it goes a little bit, it changes under the other 2 or the other 3 scholarship levels. In general, what we found, if we go to the next slide, and then I can take questions, sorry, is that the number of students that exercise their Hathaway scholarship at the college level has generally stayed fairly consistent. It's gone up a little bit in recent years outside of the pandemic. And then the only other thing I wanted to say is that generally speaking, we don't really conclude. The one thing I didn't kind of lead into this is that tuition is only one aspect of how a student will choose to go to whatever college and whatever program they would like to pursue. So what we don't see in this information is that the tuition is having any sort of detrimental impact on enrollment at the colleges. And also that the commission generally doesn't look at Hathaway as a marker as to when they should or should not raise tuition. It could be a consideration, but that is not kind of a definitive marker that they've utilized in the past. Go ahead.
Getting confused.
Okay.
The chart, we on the slide with the chart that shows college tuition as a percent of Hathaway award. So that it would show that, for instance, provisional opportunity, the college tuition is 187% of the Hathaway award. So the tuition is almost half, is almost twice what the Hathaway award is. Am I reading that slide correctly?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. So the academic year level for Hathaway for, say, an opportunity scholarship would be 1680, even though the semester award shows 840. And then the tuition level would be at 3150 for 30 credit hours. So it's roughly double.
So we can see what's happened to the erosion of the value of the Hathaway, because we've been unable to get it boosted up.
And we've done this analysis also for university, since the commission looks at University of Wyoming's tuition rate, we've done the similar analysis, but that wasn't particular to this request.
In the office.
Thank you. So this is tuition specifically. You mentioned that fees are outside of this. What is a typical percentage of fees? Because I know with the University of Wyoming, for example, when we contemplate and when we do the calculation here of how much does Hathaway cover relative to the tuition, the reality is your fees are mandatory. You don't get to opt in and out of fees. And this is a national game that I think has been played where instead of raising tuition, you raise the fees and then your tuition didn't go up. I think everybody does that. But the net effect is that it has made it more challenging for folks to have affordable college experience with the Hathaway in Wyoming. So what I'm curious about, I'm sure this is happening at the colleges just like it is at the university where the fees have gone up over the years as well. What would a typical corresponding fee package for on-campus nursing or something along those lines be relative to that $3,150?
Mr. Chairman, I'll defer to Dr. Caldwell
I know
for a
it
moment.
changes from, my apologies, but.
Mr. Chairman, the commission does receive a review of fees on an annual basis when it looks at tuition. It's just a factor of that they look at. It's not necessarily a determinant factor. What we've provided last October when they did their last review, the fees for each college are vary quite a bit. For one college, I think the low is roughly about $27 or $28 per credit hour. And those are all required fees. They may be technology fee, it may be other student fees. And then I think the highest college was roughly between $50 and $55 per credit hour. So that would be how the fees would be applied on top of tuition.
So, Mr. Chairman, that was on a per credit hour basis. So you've got effectively somewhere between 25% and 50% increase to this value.
Mr.
tuition
Chairman,
fees.
I'm not gonna, I can't do it quite as quickly as you, I guess, in terms of the percentage, but.
Yeah, okay. So, and again, unfortunately, that is kind of standard nationally, but it makes it confusing for us when we're trying to contemplate what the actual cost of attendance is, because we tend to only see the tuition number. And when we're thinking about Hathaway and whether Hathaway is appropriate, even that the 93.75%, which looks like tuition is only 93.75% of the Hathaway, even at the honors level, the reality is when I tack on my 25 to 50%, the honors Hathaway does not cover tuition and mandatory fees at any of our colleges. That's the takeaway I have. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, we actually did do the analysis on that, and that was a part of our tuition workshop that we have. We have that documentation. And just as a quick reminder to this body, whenever Mr. Swank and prior to that, Mr. Buckles did the deep dive, when we look at that proportional share of the overall budget, tuition and fees are actually included together. So we part out how much of that is tuition and how much of that is fees. So we actually have that information and have shared it, and we can provide that to you. We just don't have it off the top of our heads today, but we have it.
Particularly the newer members of the committee, there is a specific constitutional provision with regard to the University of Wyoming that it should be as nearly free as possible. It's been the custom, and I think we may have put it in statute of the legislature, to take the point of view that that same constitutional provision it applies, at least in spirit, to the community colleges as well. So that sets some context into what we're trying to do here, because the Hathaway has the effect of making it closer to being free.
Mr. Chairman, that is absolutely correct. That is in Wyoming Statute 2117-105. It is explicit.
And Mr. Chairman, when you first passed years ago Hathaway, the honors level was at 97% of tuition at the University of Wyoming. At this point in time, I think it's less than 60% at the honors level. And that when you start looking at the fees, it becomes more challenging. So this gets to the erosion that you were talking about a few minutes ago, where we haven't kept up with the costs.
erosion has been caused by two factors, one of which is simple inflation. And our earnings from the endowment have not kept up with inflation. The second is that we're victims of our own success. The Hathaway has been more popular than was originally envisioned. And frankly, the House Education Committee that put that provision in the Hathaway bill, they had a certain amount of money they could find, and they did it on that basis. And I don't think anybody had any idea of how successful it was going to be when we passed it. We knew it was a good thing, but it has over the years been much more successful. So we got more kids taking advantage of it. And what when we looked at it early on, what we showed was that a number of students who would be unable to go beyond the community college were now going to the university because of the Hathaway, and some others that would be unable to go to any post-secondary were now going to the community colleges. So it's been quite a success that way, but it's had financial effects that we haven't dealt with. Okay.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, and I think we can continue to move on the topics that you provided. I think I can sum up very quickly by saying we don't see for those presentations that necessarily the tuition in of itself does not seem to be what's impacting enrollment patterns at the community colleges. Next section that that you asked us for, and we wanted to provide is one area that we actually provide to you generally every year, and that is the impact of the assessed valuation and what would come from that on the mill levies for our in-district counties and our service area counties for the community colleges. It is different from what you have seen in years past, notably due to the fact that Campbell County is now an in-district. It actually lives in both lands right now until Gillette Community College wraps up its final accreditation. But it is considered an in-district county now. So you see a fairly significant change. But the impact overall is that those in-district counties are the ones where the assessed valuation occurs and funds the colleges, and it is not for the service area counties. And I'll let Mr. Swank talk about that just a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, this is a kind of a very abbreviated table compared to what was in the memo. What we wanted to highlight are the fact that Dr. Caldwell made mention. Campbell County, like I have it separated here. These are all the service area counties, but with Campbell County, it kind of lives in both worlds currently. It is a established college district, a local government, but its students still proceed through Sheridan College, Northern Wyoming Community College District, for their programs because Gillette College has not been fully accredited yet. I believe they've submitted their candidacy to the Higher Learning Commission and will be eligibility, sorry. And that process is still ongoing, but they do kind of function as a separate college district. They are now in their second fiscal year of assessing their property tax mills. This particular fiscal year 2024 that just started, they're at 2.6 is what their board approved. So they are the only school or college district currently that does not assess the 4 base mills that all the other districts do. But in terms of the overall analysis, what I did want to make mention of is that the service area counties that currently remain that do not form their own college district is roughly equivalent to what the current 8 counties college districts assessed valuation is. It's basically a 50-50 split between 8 counties and 15 other counties. So that kind of shows you the scale of the current college districts are logically in usually the most populated areas and the larger counties. So they would most likely have larger assessed valuations. So that's just kind of the highlight of this particular slide is that for non-college district counties, they would be, their valuation, their mills would add roughly the equivalent of what is currently already assessed at the college level.
Ed, Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Swank, I think it's important for the new members of the committee that aren't familiar with the economics of this to understand how Campbell County, the 2.6 versus the 4, how that, as the only district that's different, as a result of that, doesn't participate in the cost share through the commission. I think if you could explain a little bit about how that works, I think it would be helpful for everyone to understand that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think the two significant pieces are, one, Campbell County is a 1 mill in Campbell County is about, I think, 20 mills in Goshen County, which has the smallest college in Eastern Wyoming College. Therefore, each of their mills produce a significant amount of revenue. That's why they can currently assess 2.6 mills. The other part of that is statute actually requires two things for a college to receive state funds, which goes through the commission, the state aid. One is you have to be accredited. Gillette College has not met that. And the second one is they must assess at least 4 mills. So Gillette College also has not done that. So currently they are almost completely self-funded by their property tax mills. If they hit those criteria, they would be eligible for state funding. And then I believe at our last meeting, we talked to you about the funding allocation model, the great complex thing that it is. And what would happen is Gillette would be the 8th district to go into that model. And then we would have to distribute that funding 8 different ways rather than 7 currently. So all the other districts that levy 4 mills do receive state aid directly from the commission, through the commission, I should say. Right?
And Mr. Chairman, just a clarification on that as well is that they do still have to participate in what is required in the state. For example, the College Administrative Computing System that they're working diligently in getting implemented, and that is contracted through the commission by statute. And how that works is then we bill them for that, and they do have to fund that. So there are multiple avenues in which we have to ensure that is taken care of appropriately.
Is there any discussion by Campbell County of going to 4 mills? Because my understanding was they weren't planning on really ever doing that when we just talked about it in the legislature.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, Dr. Oberlander is not here with us today, and I would feel much more comfortable with her talking directly about her trustees in particular. But what I can share with you is they are still in the capacity building stage of building that as an independent college, and they are doing that in stages. We have an update at every single commission meeting, particularly in the transfer of employees. What just happened this month in the State Building Commission is then the acquisition of the property from the Northern Wyoming Community College District to the Gillette Community College District. So this is a sequence that occurs. So when and if that will occur would be down the line. I think they have multiple steps that are involved in the transition. It's not, as you know, it's not flipping a light switch. So they are still in the steps of transitioning employees, faculty, staff, and also hiring a new faculty and staff for the institution as it grows. So I think we'll see that change over time. Exactly when, I don't know that.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that if I could. So maybe if we could get some information back from the president over.
Dr. Oberlander, and I'm sure
Oberlander,
she's taking a note right now.
Okay.
As watching this.
I think that would be helpful because it was told to us on the floor. I mean, in multiple times that Gillette College was probably never going to have to be utilizing state aid, and that the other 7 colleges, I mean, honestly, that was kind of one of the selling points to the body. So I'd like to maybe see if we can get it, and it doesn't have to be definitive, right? But just an idea if they are looking at that, how far out that's going to be. And then a follow-up question to that would be, what has the reduction of those mills that were going to Sheridan College done to Sheridan College, with those not being intertwined any longer with Gillette, or has that occurred yet?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, so there's a couple of things with that. First, I'm going to direct everyone's attention to the fact that the commission did conduct a needs assessment study. It was substantial. You had 500 pages of fun to read, and it does discuss this particular topic where we did project out. I don't remember the exact number of years off the top of my head, but I believe it was 8 to 10 years, looking at what that budget would likely be. And of course, that will also depend on how the assessed valuation continues in the county, correct? But that budget was projected at around 17 million at that time when they became fully staffed. So I want to make sure that there's an awareness that there is actually quite a substantial study that the legislature did receive when the commission was required to conduct that study. And we did use an external body in WICHE, in fact, to conduct that study. And then the second question you had was?
The impact on Sheridan and Sheridan College's
And
funding.
Mr. Chairman, this is also in that study. So I think we have to be careful on that particular one. As of now, all of the students, and this would be on the enrollment side only, because it has always been that Sheridan County was the only one assessing mills for that. However, both the city of Gillette and Campbell County were providing funding. So I want to make sure that it is very clear that while they were not assessing mills, the city and the county were providing direct funding to help support that operation of that facility. So I want to mention that. Currently, the students are still students of Sheridan College, of Northern Wyoming Community College District, until Gillette achieves its accreditation. So in terms of that part of it, that still goes through Sheridan College. However, also keep in mind that the cost of Sheridan College is going down. It's changing because many of the employees are no longer Sheridan employees. So it is not equal. I don't want to say that, because while they've had to transition some employees, they are no longer on the payroll. They have had to now implement other staff to accommodate work that was shared at one time. So I hope that answers both of those questions. Thank you.
As you evaluate the mill situation in Campbell County, remember that not only it's expenses of the college that are ramping up as they become independent, but the price of and volumes of oil, gas, and coal are very important. And if those should decline enough, that can trigger an increase in the mill levy.
And Mr. Chairman, on that note, I would be remiss if I didn't encourage the committee to pay attention to these numbers. Mr. Swank will continue to provide more data on how these mill levies shake out for all of the counties, as the Revenue Committee talks about property tax relief and what that impact would be, because the community colleges receive mills among other entities. So we will be part of that conversation. And if you have questions about your particular county and whatnot, let us know. Collectively, we can make sure you get the answers that you need.
Okay, so we are going to continue on because I am watching the clock. And I heard that you wanted to be on the road by 4 o'clock. So we're going to flip to the next topic that you wanted to make sure that we covered, and that is our biennium budget request. We do share that because it is public for what goes on. We have a consultative process. We have a draft, tentative budget. It is formed through public meetings. We actually start this in the April commission meeting, where we conduct a workshop. We go over what that process looks like. And we then adopt a tentative budget in June to make sure everybody is aware of this. This has input from the colleges, the trustees, trustee association. So it is a quite a collaborative process that comes through. The final budget is up for adoption on August the 25th. There is a special meeting in which the commission is tasked with its final action, so that we, meaning Mr. Swank right here, can get the budget submitted by the due date of August the 31st. Some things that I wanted to point out for you on how this budget process works. The commission is statutorily required to advocate for the community college system in the state of Wyoming. The colleges are not specifically named in the Constitution the way the K-12 districts are, or the K-12 system in the university, simply because they didn't exist. But Article 7 certainly gave the legislature the power to create this education system, in which you did. And so it is why we make sure that we're very strong and that language is explicit as instituted by the legislature. And as you've been hearing, the commission is a coordinating body. We are not a governing body. That lies with the 56 elected trustees. And their job is to then govern those individual colleges with a local control process that we have. And we're actually, it is a complicated process, but it's actually a really great process where that local control really can work. And then we can talk about that on the larger state level and impacts to your state's interests. I do want to mention here that we've got that the commission administration is 4% or less, and I'm going to quantify that even more of the budget, the commission's agency budget. And the reason why I want to mention this is that also includes all of the technology that goes to the community colleges and runs the consolidated systems that we have. So I will share that the commission agency itself, the staff, the commissioners, the meetings and all of that is 1.6% of our total budget. So we are a lean organization, and we rely very heavily on our good friends like Ms. Taylor to help us out, and certainly the college staff who really, we have a consultative process that is quite extensive and frankly works very well in how we can work together. And then the commission is charged with coordinating multiple things, not only across the community college system for the state in terms of the colleges, but also with the University of Wyoming. So we work very collaboratively with the institution. And I will just give an example. The commission is the rules writing authority for the state when you have for promulgation of rules when you pass legislation that impacts both the colleges and the university. For example, the common transcript legislation that was, I will recognize a good co-chairman, Representative Northrup, and then actually this committee. And in fact, you will be receiving an updated report on the Common Course numbering system and the WYO transfer in the next few weeks. So with that, I want to talk about what you're going to see in this exception. I'm going to have Michael go through the exact numbers, but I wanted you to see what is in our exception request right now. There will already be changes. We know this. Make sure that the college presidents, Ms. Taylor, and the commissioners are well aware of this as it moves forward. We do have a request for a full-time position, and that is for the Workforce Development and Projects Coordinator. We have a lot of workforce that goes on in our community colleges. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. And as a matter of fact, we don't have a person who can even chair our Workforce Development Committee across our community colleges. I want to mention that the Joint Transportation, Highway, and Military Affairs Committee has a working bill right now about a part-time individual to help coordinate veterans affairs across the colleges. The Overseas Combat Veterans Tuition Waiver Program is in the commission, and we don't have a person who can do that. If we have to, we could combine those together in this full time with the efficiencies that we could probably achieve, but we wanted to mention that, and you will see that written in the language of that position. We have the college state aid support, and there is a fixed cost inflation adjustment in here. This is something that you've seen in the past, and then an increase for the subscription cost for the libraries. Again, we have an 8th community college district that we need to expand our licensing for. And then I'm going to say technology, technology, technology that is centered within the Community College Commission. The CACS that you see there, that is the College Administrative Computing System. That is where all the student data lives. That forms the basis of the DMARS and frankly the SLEDS data system. WIO transfer, that is in part the large segment of the Common Transcript. And you're going to get an updated report on that. A request for that technology that it, just as a reminder, includes the community colleges and the University of Wyoming. A course sharing platform that was born out of our Wyoming Innovation Partnership. And that allows for the sharing of courses and a great efficiency. Again, the community colleges and the University of Wyoming are involved in that. Of course, the statewide longitudinal education data system, again, out of that same legislation. And I will mention, you heard this morning, I think it was actually this afternoon, about the early childhood and the education, the early childhood integrated data system. You will see a request in our budget. We did talk with the governor's office about the sustainability, long-term sustainability of that in the SLEDS system. That is possible. Whether or not to do that is still a policy decision. Whether or not to put that data in there, we know how important early childhood is, particularly on the impact of third grade reading. Third grade reading is our first benchmark in the post-secondary education attainment strategic plan for the state. Whether that ends up in our budget or ends up in another budget, I just want to mention that is an important component, and I hope you'll support that regardless of where it shows up. The next thing that I want to call out is something that has been on the radar for quite a long time. That would be the special projects. You're going to see an economic impact analysis of higher education and the workforce for our state. That is in there, but we're not sure if that's going to be there because that may be funded out of the Wyoming Innovation Partnership and Director Shainfeld. So we're working with her. We're short on time to make that decision, but that's coming. Wyoming investment in nursing is back in our budget, and we have an expansion. So we're happy to see that we're looking at expanding the nursing program at one of the colleges this year, and you're going to see another one in either the next year or the next year, depending on how quickly Eastern can do that. And then I would be remiss without mentioning there are many things that the commission is charged with coordinating, or they're sort of off budget, but they're in our budget, which is fascinating, or we have the responsibility for administration of those programs. That's the Wyoming Works, very successful Wyoming Works program, primarily focused on credit and non-credit CTE programs that lead to an industry recognized credential. Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship, right? That's a big one yet to be fully funded. And the Kickstart, which did provide some seed funding for us to get started on that. I would hope as we get to this topic that at your next meeting, we would have the opportunity to maybe showcase some of the results from the Kickstart Wyoming's Tomorrow, that we could share with you the impact of the Elbogen grant that is wrapped around that. If Director Shainfeld could share with you a little bit of what's going on in the Wyoming Innovation Partnership, because it's really fantastic. And if we could do a showcase on the workforce outcomes data that is coming out of the SLEDS, I think he would be very pleased to see the work that your co-chairman here in this committee has really launched over the years. So with that, I know Ms. Heron would like to make some points, and then we'll turn it over to the numbers guy, Mr. Swain.
Thank you for that, Dr. Caldwell. So standing between you and the numbers guy is me, just for a short bit here. And what I wanted to do, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, is kind of tie all of this together. I think what you've heard from us collectively, from the Community College Commission, from WACD over the last several years, is that this is a comprehensive look at how the colleges are supporting the state of Wyoming. And what you see before you in the handout that I gave you, this will likely change as we get closer to session, but this is where we are right now. And what we've done is broken this down into how what you can do as a legislature to support students across the state, and what you can do to support healthy institutions in the community colleges. And there's lots of opportunities in front of us. It's not necessarily one is more important than the other, because they do support the colleges or students in different ways. And so that's how I'm talking about it, using that building blocks term. So if you can kind of think of how you construct a very strong and supportive structure, building, something like that, it's made up of lots of bricks, right? And that's how we look at this. So if you look at what's been before you in the commission's budget, the commission's, even their priorities, their strategic plan focuses on student attainment, advocating for the community colleges, focuses on sustainable funding for the colleges, and that's a message you've heard from WACD as well. What you see in front of you is continued support for the Wyoming Innovation Partnership. They are working on putting together a budget proposal, which we'll see coming through the governor's office. I think it'll probably be in that $30 million range. Will be formally approved here very soon. And that's a collaborative process to come to that agreement within that group. The Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship, of course, you know from Dr. Caldwell just mentioned, we're still $20 million away from getting to that $50 million mark, to where the scholarships can officially be awarded from that endowment. So we're very close and very appreciative of the support that's given to that so far. Lots of success in our workforce programs, and Dr. Caldwell already mentioned opportunity perhaps for more investment in those sorts of things like the investment in nursing program. There is always more demand in those programs across the state in each of the community colleges than what they can fill. And then also through other programming like Wyoming Works. You heard Dr. Caldwell mention the inflation adjustment. That is something that hasn't gone away, even though there has been some inflation dollars granted to the community colleges. It is based on historical dollars. And Mr. Swank can get into more of the numbers with you on that, but that is something similar to the conversation that you had earlier today. The colleges are in the same boat, just for different reasons and different populations. So we would encourage support, whatever that looks like, encouraging through the budget process, of course, recognizing this 2/3 that we do have with the budget year. The budget itself might be the space for that to happen. And then, Mr. Chairman, just wanted to let you know that it is a priority for WACD to support the commission's budget requests, and how they all tie together to support what's needed to deliver successful programming. And then the last thing that I'll end on is, well, two things, is we've been asked several times, you know, if there is some one-time dollars available, what would be some things that would be of use for the community colleges. And we don't take that lightly. Of course, investing in the final push for Wyoming's Tomorrow is something that's very important. Investing in the Wyoming Innovation Partnership. There's a lot of great things happening in that space, and I would encourage you to hear from Director Schoenfeld. I think you can learn a lot from that process, and maybe some matching opportunities. I've put together, and with the help of President Tyndall here behind me and some others, to put a small group together to look at what would be some beneficial opportunities for matching for the foundations for the colleges. We've been given opportunities like that in the past. They've usually come with some pretty tight sideboards on them, but getting creative, allowing some flexibility, and what could be most beneficial, knowing that the foundations really are from A to Z in terms of abilities, size, fundraising ability, all of those things, what would give them the most benefit and flexibility. So we're working on some recommendations on something like that because people are asking us. And then finally, of course, always supporting the annually ranked CapCon projects that come through that bill. In that separate process, we have two things moving for Eastern Wyoming College, and then Gillette College has a number of acquisitions in that process that Dr. Caldwell already expressed to you with the transition. So, Mr. Chairman, that's what I have for you. I would be happy to expand on any of these and then provide more information as things progress into your next meeting.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And what I'd like to just hear more about real quick is, Dr. Caldwell, is the progression of the new nursing facility there in Rock Springs. And then there's going to be one built in Eastern as well, in Torrington?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Berger, I can have, so those two things. So first, I can have Dr. Dale provide a summary update, and we'll get that out to you
Cool.
on the nursing facility at Western. There was an update, I believe, at the State Building Commission just last month. The point on EWC wasn't facilities-based. It is not at this point that I'm aware of. This is about potentially expanding the existing nursing program by adding faculty and students and I believe in both of their locations, in both Goshen County and in Converse County, but that is not yet. We just given you a little preview of, we see the colleges looking to expand nursing as much as possible.
Good, thank you.
Thing with regard to matching fund opportunities. Number of us been talking to the university about reviving their matching endowment fund efforts that they've done in the past and haven't in recent years, about reviving that. If they decide to try to revive that, making common cause with them to get a similar provision in the community colleges and build support might well be something you wanted to talk to the university about.
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. I was at that meeting, if you'll recall. So yes, I have brought that up. And Mr. Chairman, then if we can turn it over to Mr. Swank, he will go through the specific numbers that we've been referencing.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to go through briefly some of the specific numbers that we provided to our commission in June. So what we provided to you was the tentative budget adoption materials that we submitted to the commission in June. They voted to adopt it. As Dr. Caldwell mentioned, there have been some changes since June in terms of what may stay in, what may go out. And that's why we have the tentative and then the final in August prior to submitting the budget to the governor's office. I'm just going to highlight a few items. So we do have the inflation budget request in here. The basis for this request is in 2 years ago for the 23-24 biennial budget request. The commission asked the colleges, what are your hard dollar figures from, I believe it was 2011 to 2019? What have been your hard dollar fixed cost increases? And then that was the basis of the request. It wasn't a purely inflationary request. So what they did is that request, I believe, was about $21.1 million or $21.2 million. The legislature appropriated $7.5 million of ongoing additional state aid in the 2022 budget bill. Now, that was obviously after significant budget reductions in 2020 and 2021, but the commission has interpreted that $7.5 million as part of that roughly inflation or fixed cost request. So this request here of $60 million is the remainder of that 23-24 request, plus the inflation, the Wyoming Cost of Living Index inflation from 2020 to 2022, the fourth quarter. So this portion, only about $2 million of it is actual inflationary factor to what was submitted in 2023. The remainder of that is actually the hard dollar costs, the fixed costs that were provided to the commission in 2021.
And Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I would also emphasize it's actually lower than what inflation itself would have been. And it is not all fixed costs. We were very specific to bring things like the electric bill, the water, the insurance, motor pool. We were very literal on these costs to bring, because this committee had in the past ask us, where is that deficit? So we wanted to make sure we were bringing to you actual numbers that then we could apply the inflation in the most recent year.
Mr. Chairman, moving on, the other couple things I wanted to highlight, this particular request related to the post-secondary economic analysis or economic impact study. We're not certain, but we believe this may come out of our budget due to having it be funded through the Wyoming Innovation Partnership. The other thing I wanted to really emphasize here is, so later on through here, all the shaded cells or rows are basically technology. One of the things that Dr. Caldwell made mention of, we now have an 8th campus, an 8th college, Gillette County or Community College, and this is the first budget for which the commission has the requirement to make sure that we're serving that 8th college. Now, the reason for that nuance is important because even though they're a college district and they're actually not receiving state aid funding, they're still required to follow all the same statutes as all the other districts, which includes, as Ms. Taylor mentioned, the CapCon process. So Gillette College is having to provide all of their CapCon projects through our process, to the State Building Commission, to Governor's Office, and to the legislature. So we coordinate that with them. Another one is this computing system right here, the College Administrative Computing System. All colleges are required to be on one system. The contract is held by the commission. But as Dr. Caldwell said, we now have Gillette College attached to that, and they actually fund it. We actually pay, and then they reimburse us for that cost of that system because they're not eligible to receive state funding. The other portion I wanted to emphasize is that at our last commission meeting, Gillette College got their first program approvals, I believe it was 25 or 26, from the commission to start having those programs worked through their own campus. Obviously, it still has to be under the supervision of Sheridan College, but they have started that process already. So those are all examples of requirements that college needs to comply with, even though they're not receiving direct state aid funding. So that's kind of segues into a lot of this technology. The commission is required to facilitate those efficiencies and trying to make sure that the systems that the colleges are using are consistent. They're all being applied fairly consistently or the same. And one of the things I will note actually is this request here, the College Administrative Computing System RFP consultant. One of the things that the commission has been doing the last few years is trying to look into having a new RFP issued to potentially go with a new college administrative computing system vendor. The system we're on now I believe we've been on it for a little over 20 years. We've been working with the procurement office to verify when and how that particular RFP process needs to go forward, as well as working with the Department of Enterprise Technology Services. As we are a state agency, but the system is college-based, they're kind of our state-level consultants, so to speak, to help us get advice on this process. But we would also likely need a private vendor to really navigate the system. The system, we would estimate, is in the tens of millions of dollars, and we would like to be as prudent as possible in getting that consistent advice from a consultant. That's why this RFP request is in there. The other ones that Dr. Caldwell has mentioned is WIO transfer or the Common College transcript. We're trying to maintain that as well as add the new campus of Gillette College. Course sharing, again, adding a new campus, Gillette College, as well as maintaining that system after it is up and running from Wyoming Innovation Partnership money. The last significant technology request is State Longitudinal Education Data System. This was required of the commission in 2019 to pursue this or to implement the system. It had some hiccups early years in different agencies, but the system is now up and running. It has produced research reports, but the system has actually been mostly funded through a U.S. Department of Education grant for the last 3 or 4 years. So that grant actually expires I believe it's next February. The commission has worked with the Department of Education to secure a second grant, which is this $3.75 million. The application was submitted in June, and we expect a decision by the federal government sometime, I believe, in September. So that would hopefully continue to mature this system on the federal grant, but there would be at some point the potential for this to come back onto the state, not at this level, but in terms of ongoing maintenance and keeping that system up and running. The commission is actually the facilitator of the executive board, which includes several agencies, Department of Workforce Services, Department of Education, and now includes the Department of Family Services. So we're kind of the focal point for the system. The one thing that is not on this request that we know is changing potentially, as Dr. Caldwell said, is the ESIDS or eKids system, the Early Childhood Integrated Data System from DFS. We've been working with them over the summer to investigate how to bring that system into the SLED system rather than having it solely on its own in DFS. So this request would maybe adjust because of that. You have something else? Okay.
No, we don't know if that one will show up in our budget request or not. That's still a policy decision to be made. We just hope it'll be supported wherever it lives.
Right. And then I just wanted to highlight a few of the later ones here. The Wyoming Investment in Nursing Program, that is run through the commission. We provide funding reimbursement for both faculty and student loans. It's a loan program, but it's a forgivable loan program, meaning if a student graduates and they serve in state for a certain period of time that's in our rules, their loan is forgiven and is written off. So with the budget reductions of 2020 and 2021, the faculty funding was not impacted quite so much, but there are several colleges that are trying to increase their capacity. And they believe they've provided the information to support that capacity increase. The first one is LCCC, Laramie County Community College, pardon me. Use acronyms all the time. And the second one is Eastern Wyoming College. But as Dr. Caldwell mentioned, that particular college is postponing a potential expansion request as they work to work with the Board of Nursing and so forth to make sure that they have the capabilities to deliver those programs sufficiently. So this will be reduced, this faculty funding request will be reduced to the Laramie County Community College funding request. And on the student side, the one thing I will note is the budget reductions from 2020 and 2021 did take out a sizable chunk of the student loan side of the program. The commission advised and worked with the colleges to not fully, but mostly suspend student loans during the 21-22 biennial budget so that we kind of understood what the full impacts of all the budget reductions were. Since then, we've been working with our loan administrator, and there has been an uptick in students that desire to pursue this career path, and we believe that it is prudent to have access to more students to go through these programs. The one thing I'll note is that this particular program, all of the Wyoming Investment in Nursing Program, was taken off of the general fund for the 23-24 biennium. It was provided for in 2022 Senate File 66 as ARP funding. But in that bill, it requires it to come back to the general fund for this 25-26 budget. So that will be one thing you'll see significantly different from the 23-24 to this budget, is that this entire program comes back onto the general fund. I will note just a couple other things. One is the library services. As we've mentioned several times, we're adding a new college. We're trying to make sure that one of the things that we do is make sure that all the colleges have access to the same resources for their library systems. And we're adding that particular campus, as well as there have been some inflationary impacts on those licenses and so forth. And then the last one I really wanted to highlight here is what we call the Kickstart Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship. Last year's supplemental budget bill, the commission was appropriated $1.25 million for what is called the Higher Education Scholarship. However, the provision in the budget bill basically applies all of the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship statute to it. So that's why we call it Kickstart. It was only funded for 1 year, so we are going to, the commission has approved a tentative request to have a 2-year appropriation for that program if the regular Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship endowment is not fully funded. The other challenge to that is even if the endowment is funded, there would be time for investment earnings to kick over to the expenditure account. So this could be either a Kickstart Wyoming's Tomorrow request or an expenditure account request for the expenditure of scholarships if the endowment is filled. So there's a couple of moving parts there, but that's kind of where this particular request comes from. And I stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, seeing none, thank you all very much. I think that concludes this portion of it. is there any public comment on what we've been talking about with the community colleges? Yes, sir.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I am Brad Tyndall, president of Central Wyoming College, and also the POP, the president of the presidents. And so, yeah, I was very happy to see that Ms. Taylor provided the basic handout. And in my position as president of the president, and also as an economist, I just like to point out it feels kind of obvious to me is, community colleges, we typically say, we're an important sector, we're the sector that, builds the economy, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's kind of, we've said it so many times, it lacks meaning a little bit. So I would like to frame that just a little bit. So many of you probably know people who were benefits after World War II of the, basically the GI Bill, right? And so after World War II, there was a basic shift in the economy. You had all these people who didn't have education. And we said, you know what, we're going to rejigger and totally redo our economy. And we were successful and became the strongest economic power. That's basic history. And so when I look at Wyoming as an economist, and I'm not born and raised here, I came in as an outsider about 10 years ago, and I'm looking at saying, hey, there's a whole lot of potential here. And what you have is a state where historically you didn't need much education to do really well. In our communities, even my community in Riverton, there are people who own an airplane and a helicopter and don't have a bachelor's degree. I'm going, this is amazing. Of course, people would come to Wyoming and make a lot of money in the minerals industry. And now we're seeing a major shift. And it almost feels like it's after World War II, where we're saying, okay, now all of a sudden a degree matters. And there's a huge shift in the structure of our economy, right? And so we have that one of the highest percentage of populations that don't have a degree, when all of a sudden the economy nationally and globally is shifting again. And it could be a scary and terrible thing, or you could say there's an opportunity, like those who say never ignore a disaster. Those who embrace it and look at the reality and say, let's do something, it can be an exciting time. And so this is where I feel we are. And I feel like Ms. Taylor's handout kind of is an economic template. I mean, you say, like, who do you need to train? And your Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship is those older population people who have to get retrained in degrees. That's kind of a mini, not Europe, but it's a Marshall Plan type of thing. You're really trying to target that. And then you say, well, what we got to rejigger and refocus our economy on other opportunities. And that's the Wyoming Innovation Partnership. And people say, well, we have to be more efficient. Well, guess what? We're all working together now. We're trying to find these efficiencies. And another efficiency you see in this is the commission's request for this workforce coordinator position. Right now, it's hard for our business and industry to come along and say, well, who do I talk to at Central? Because I want to start, some major robotic welding company. Well, it's kind of complicated. Well, you talk to Brad, or maybe what service area? People don't know our service areas. We need a coordinating person that can really streamline this, because we know we miss opportunities all the time from industries that want to come to the state. And so that's a coordinating position. And then, of course, part of this request is just saying, we're used to living on a shoestring. And that's kind of our pride. We can do things so efficiently as a sector. But when we're not compensated, and brought up to speed with cost of living and inflation, people, you're taking away our shoestring. So it can't even work on a shoestring. So when I look at the general plan that's outlined in the handout, I say it's a bold plan to really hit the opportunity of our day, retrain our workforce, strategically partner, and that matching fund piece with the partners for our foundations. People say, why don't you work more and get more partnership money? Well, help us. We need some incentive money to do this. And we're not big universities that have a lot of friends with deep pockets. We definitely need help in that regard. So I'm really happy to see what we're supporting and what was presented today. And I hope just take that to heart. Thank you very much. And I will answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else? I think that covers it. Committee, I think that completes our work. The next meeting is the hybrid meeting, September 27th in Casper or on Zoom, and then the dates of the final committee meeting in November, LSO is
Mr. Chairman, it's November 14th and 15th here in Cheyenne.
14th and 15th here in Cheyenne. So, yeah, and that is traditional for you newcomers. We tend to have the last meeting in Cheyenne because it gives us better access to the LSO facilities and drafting abilities as we do something different. With that, we're adjourned.
Nice work, Mr. Chairman.